This is from the website thewaythetruthandthelife.net. This is Monday, the 14th of April, 2014, and we're observing the news through many sources in the internet and have reason for deep concern watching the murdering of the Islamofascists as they attack the Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine. Note, I'm using Islamofascist here in a broader sense. The background there is the Islamic Tartars that murdered and raped and sold into slavery so many hundreds of thousands of Russians, and they're involved in this. And the background of the Second World War, the Nazis invaded, and the Western Ukraine, which was Roman Catholic, largely participated in the German army supporting it. And there's a background, what they call the right sector and others there today left over. And then there's another point that many Americans don't know, that also joining in with these Ukrainians that joined Hitler were Muslims from Chechnya and Dagestan and the Crimea. So there's a history of working relationship between them, and this right sector and very people that you see on the videos, some were in Chechnya and Dagestan fighting with the Muslims against the Russians, and they have a background of jargon of hate for communists and Jews, just going back to the Nazi area, and the fact that the largest Nazi Waffen-SS group was a Muslim group. That's a whole nother thing. I'm just explaining that I'm using the term Islamofascist to include both the fascists in Ukraine, which are killing Russian-speaking people and have been killing Russians and proud of it. Many of them going and fighting with the Muslims, and the background of the Muslims working together with the Nazis to kill Jews, to kill Roma, to kill any number of people that were not on their list of likable. Remember, Turkey is next door to Ukraine, and they are sending support for the Muslim Tartars and the Islamofascists in eastern Ukraine.
Hey YouTube, welcome to another episode of News in 2 Minutes, bringing you the news that you need to know every day. Let's begin. The rights of the people of Turkey continue to erode as the government announced that it is now illegal to gather in groups and warned that protesters will be arrested and jailed if caught. The warning only served to fuel a nation that has been divided since a recent onslaught of police aggravation caused hundreds of thousands of Turks to gather against the government this June. A bystander recorded video that shows what appears to be either pro-government supporters or off-duty authorities chasing a group of people through the streets of Turkey with machetes and other weapons late Saturday night, hitting and abusing members of the public at random. As official authorities arrive, we see a verbal exchange with the aggressors directing the officers where to go, followed by a continued attack on bystanders as police sit by.
Note that Turkey is right next door to Ukraine and Crimea, the Tartars that killed hundreds of thousands in their invasion of Moscow as the Islamic invasion when they took slaves and sold them to the Turkish Ottoman Empire. They support the Islamofascists in Ukraine now, and the subterfuge of using civilians. Did you notice the plainclothesman who was using a machete and kicking women on the street there in Turkey, right next to the door to Ukrainian, that then when the uniformed police arrived, the thugs with the machetes gave them the instructions. That's what they're doing in the Ukraine. They're thugs in plain clothes, like they're a civilian, going and abusing people, and they are really the ones in charge. Watch this next video after this finishes up.
And that's it for this episode of News in 2 Minutes. Check back tomorrow for more news that the aware need the most. This week's News in 2 Minutes is brought to you by SHTFplan.com, where even the officials go for news, and SQmetals.com for all your precious metal needs.
I will first show a distorted clip shown to the Americans and Europeans, cut out of the truth and used to cause doubt and throw guilt on the people who just want to be free.
There are confusing and conflicting reports surrounding pro- and anti-government demonstrations in eastern Ukraine. In the city of Slavyansk, a pro-Russian militant was reportedly killed in fighting with forces loyal to Kiev, according to local sources. Russian television has broadcast pictures of the alleged victim, but Euronews is unable to verify the content, which was obtained from a social media website. A group of women form a human shield in another amateur video, which purports to show armed men mounting a roadblock to control access to and from the city. When asked if the so-called self-defense units would be prepared to open fire, one of the men said yes, if the attackers come close and shoot, then we'll shoot back. Kiev has blamed the Kremlin for the rash of rebellions, while Moscow has warned that it will protect the region's Russian speakers if they come under attack.
Now, this clip is shown to the Europeans and Americans as a background for eventually supporting and making war with NATO. But the truth of the matter is this, that the Islamofascists joined with the Muslims to attack in Russia, in Dagestan, in Chechnya. And they are supporting one another, the Islamofascists. They, the one right-wing leader in Ukraine bragged about murdering 20 Russian soldiers. They are willing to kill and beat Russian-speaking people with their hatred, and they have had a history of outspoken hatred for communists and Jews. They are from the same Islamofascist Nazi background of the Ukrainians that joined Hitler's army and the Muslims that joined Hitler's army to kill Jews and those who would not submit. Now, here is a clip that shows what an observer on the street that videotaped this is in Russian, and my wife speaks Russian. I'll explain to you what he said afterwards.
Нападали на винницкой машине, винницкие номера. БТРы выехали, защитили. То есть это делали свои винницкие. Я снимаю после перестрелки. Снял, первая машина была тех, кто приехали нападать на солдат, стоящих на БТРах. Мою машину тоже побили. Вон на капоте прострелы сзади. Поэтому это все спровоцировано специально. Вот я сейчас пойду их машины снимать, их БТРы. Вот они приготовились ехать, но машина-то нападала винницкая. Меня отпугивали, стреляли по земле. Так а что они с винницкой машины выскочили? Машина-то винницкая, с которой они выскочили, вот это стрелять начали. Так, оказать, у вас есть аптечки? Куда попало, где болит?
грудь попала.
Грудь?
Живот просто.
Так, а ты с ними был, да? Так, аптечку сейчас. Сейчас он...
Ай, блядь. Сука.
Вот парня застрелили.
The man in the video explaining what happened with the Ukrainian tanks there, he says that all the cars had the local license plates from the pro-Russian speaking city, and that the white car with a local license plate came and made, at first went in like it's shooting in the direction of the tanks, and then it turned and killed the men in the other cars that were pro-Russian. This looks very much like they were in cooperation with the Armenian tanks is set up to make it look like there was provocation, that he came first shooting in the direction of the tanks and then killed the pro-Russian people on the road. But his action would be give justification for the tanks shooting or the pro-Russian people being murdered, as if they had been shooting at the tanks. And the ignorance of Obama, that he didn't understand what Russia did in Georgia was to rescue people from Islamofascist dominating hatred of one culture over another. Russia is filled with cultures. They've let them go, speaking their language, having their dances, just that they have to respect the rights of others also. They have a growing problem that is overtaking the country. Burning churches and killing non-Muslims is something that's been going on ever since Muhammad had his Surah 8 and 9 and the Surah of abrogation, that all the nice things don't count. And anybody that really understands the Quran knows that. And it's the foundation for trying to make a better world while feeding the alpha male selfish control of women and children and property. That's background. There are people being murdered by this Islamofascist spirit, and it justifies itself by all the evil of the Western world today, with its drunkenness, its promiscuity, its abortions, its children without a home, and all the breakdown arrogance like a bisexual president and a bossy mama role model that doesn't stand by her husband. All of these breakdown, that there's nothing to build what you would find, like the respect for family that you find amongst the Amish. Many things going on here, but I'm telling you before I show the observations and explain. I'm telling you the end result. If those Islamofascists can have the support, as they do, of Obama and the ignorant people now in charge of Europe, to let the right sector Islamofascists in Ukraine come and kill and murder to dominate the Russian-speaking people that have the freedom to worship how they want. I taught in Belarus. I understand there's hatred and resentment between the Nazi Catholics and the communist background Orthodox Church. Many of you don't understand this, but it's a deep inbred hatred, a conflict. The Nazis and the Muslims that joined them did so much harm And there's so much fear of this evil. Russian people have been dominated by the Tartars. They took a couple 100,000 out of and killed a couple 100,000 in their invasion of Moscow and sold them to slaves to the Muslim Turks and Arabs. This background is real, and Islam is real, and it's in the background as a subterfuge. But to protect the rights of people just to walk down the street and speak their own language and be respected, that happens all over Russia. There's, I don't know, more than 20 official languages in Russia, and they respect this. If NATO, with Obama's bisexual ignorance and homosexual preferences and lack of respect for home and marriage and the woman in the home, if Obama, with his early daycare that the women don't have to care for their children, and autism just keeps growing, and the children don't have the care to grow up to be able to care, I'll talk about that. But if NATO doesn't stop these Islamofascists from invading the eastern part of Ukraine, the Russian-speaking part, doesn't allow them some self-determination and protect them, that they can go on the street and demand their rights without being shot by this right sector parading as somebody else, so that they can use it to justify the way the Islamofascists have always. They kill and use the response as the justification for killing. How do you destroy the destroyer? Wake up. There's subterfuge here. Some of it is just ignorance of the day. Others has to do with grandfathers being carried away by the communists to some camp and never returning, then the hatred that exists there. And some has to do with the Nazi rape and murder. The background is there that many of the grandchildren who are now in charge don't really understand. They just have the hatred that was generated because of the pain and resentment of their parents and grandparents. But if the western part of Ukraine, the Islamofascists, are given control enough to go in as they have, and I've seen it and heard it and watched it, as they're killing innocent people on the road and on the street. They can get their snipers out there in the country and among the army, or parading as civilians, and promote this violence to justify mass domination and murder. I want Putin to go in and protect these people the way he did in Georgia. That, I don't know how, narcissistic fool chewing on his tie. What's his name? The Georgian president that graduated from some American university, and we thought he'd go in and help Georgia become a modern country. Instead, he tried to dominate all the subcultures that Stalin had put under Georgia. And Russia went into Georgia and rescued them. They now have freedom, not domination. Look at what's going on there. Saakashvili was his name, eating his tie while he's trying to hope that NATO will back him up and fight against the Russians. They're trying to promote war. And the Islamofascists want this war. I hope NATO isn't so stupid. And I hope that they don't follow Obama, who's like Clinton, more interested in what's happening under his desk, who's sitting under his desk, than he is in what's going on in the world, if you know what I mean. The preoccupation with narcissism and homoerotic behavior is somebody that didn't have the care to develop at a higher level. And many of our leaders don't have that ability. Who cares about the community? Who cares about a healthy place to send your daughter so that she doesn't get raped? And if she, who cares if she gets pregnant, that somehow the foolish boy who raped her is really a father and needs to take some responsibility? Just kill the baby. All this stuff. The point here. Please wake up, America. If NATO, under Obama's supervision, lets those right-wing Islamofascists. Now, I want to tell you, the Niagara Association, associated with that imam in Pennsylvania, has a form for Ukraine by his Met, or whatever you call it. This is part of the front group for the Turkish Imam Gulen that has charter schools all over America. We need to care about Ukraine in our interfaith dialogue. We're peaceful Muslims, and we're just trying to build interfaith dialogue and get involved in what's going on. And it's a deception. Please wake up. I'm going to watch the news today. I will put together a better video showing and giving background, some insights. There's many problems we're facing, and the decadence of the Western society, the lack of the care. The truth of Christ is love, caring, and the ability to care is a predestined thing determined by the care that the child receives from its mother in its first 2 years. That's the foundation. You can build Islamofascists on it, or you can build loving, working together Christians who build healthy marriages and homes. But that foundation has to be there. And if it isn't, you have all the problems with narcissism, sociopathy, autism, all of these things from not having a healthy mother in the home, giving a breastfeeding, nursing bond for a couple of years or 4 years to her child, and raising the child in the loving protection of a mother. Okay, I'm going to put this up. I will look for some of the videos to incorporate the evil that's going on, like that man with the ponytail who is has a in the Ukrainian government and has a position over human rights, and it's even proud, showing him beating the head of the communications because he let the news go out and showed what was going on in the Russian Duma, so that he was beaten and taken out of his job. And then you can see the same man with a ponytail in the legislature beating somebody who tries to speak up for the rights of the people who speak Russian. Wake up, you ignorant people, and take some responsibility, because war is coming. Islamofascism is coming. There's a birthing policy. And the Muslims are getting involved here, whether it's from the Tartars or from this Erdogan, or his enemy now, because Erdogan cheated Muslims, so he's not even a good Muslim according to the Quran. And that imam from Pennsylvania, Gulen, and his Met or whatever, they're already involved in Ukraine and supporting the Tartars. Wake up. Wake up. I pray. I pray for Vladimir Putin, that he has the strength, if the forces of good are so weak in Ukraine that they let the Ukrainian army and right sector go in and murder and dominate these people, to subjugate them. and beat them. To look at the video of them, get on your knees, and beating women. And look at the evil that this Islamofascism has bred. Okay, I'm going to stop here now, and I will find the videos showing some of the observations I'm talking about. But the conclusion is, if the West doesn't restrain the Islamofascists and see what they're doing, that they let them go in and murder and intimidate and dominate the Russian-speaking culture, then I pray that Putin has the strength to go in and defend them, even if it brings on a war with NATO. We got to stand up to this evil ignorance that is promoted by narcissism and homosexuality and the breakdown of the home and women's liberation. Look at Iceland. Look at the rise in autism in Iceland, the most liberated homosexual, openly homosexual president, not one under the table. Look at the rise in autism in this sick culture. Look what's going on in Sweden with the women domination. The men have been a second-rate citizens going back to the 30 Years' War, and a homosexual daughter took over for the king of Sweden and then abdicated and went to live in a nunnery where she could have female companions without question. I still need to put in the Russian tape showing the right sector fascists beating Russian-speaking people and making them get on their knees, and many being carried away, being beaten with clubs. Terrible. And the tape has in Russian and Ukraine. I have my wife explain that, and I have her explain the right sector with the tanks supporting them were shooting people on the street in the way to the city with their tanks, that they have the right sector in the middle of them. And it's much like the Turkish plainclothesmen on the street beating people. They're really the ones in charge. That I came across this Democracy Now! Video just now, and my wife and I watched it, and we were amazed. It was written back in November, and this Jewish professor had some insight into the truth of what's going on and the truth about Obama and the ignorance that's going on. So I'm going to include that now, and I will go back and insert the parts of the actual footage and give my wife's explanation of what's going on, showing the subterfuge of the Islamofascists. My wife has given me some instructions. I'll record what she says directly, so you know it's not me just saying something. Go ahead.
It's not instructions, that's clarity. Why is problem exist in between Russia and Ukraine? And Ukrainian people have problem living there many years because nationalists groups who supporting fascism and Bandera, that's people who having that ideas is threatening Russians. They are not supporting peace or work with Russia. They just want to destroy any relationship with Russia because they have fascist ideology. The people...
What you said about having a referendum.
The people demand referendum because they want to make their democratic choice. And they had a president who they choose. Even he's not perfect president, but it was chosen democratically. And now their demands is nobody don't want to hear it. Just using strength against their plea. Let us have our referendum and stop this fascist group, provoke them and kill them on the street. That's what the people demand. If it's democracy, it have to be open and honestly talk with people what is problem, where it's come from, and how to solve. And it's very sad, European Union and American president talking so arrogantly. They talking about what they should do, but not talking with people, how help them solve their problem. Need to step down and incline ears to hear it.
Thank you. The following video that predicts what is going on today was uploaded on February 20th.
Talk about the latest, Professor Cohen.
Where do you want me to begin? I mean, we are watching history being made, but history of the worst kind. That's what I'm telling my grandchildren. Watch this. What's happening there, let's take the big picture, then we can go to the small picture. The big picture is people are dying in the streets every day. The number 50 is certainly too few. They're still finding bodies. Ukraine is splitting apart down the middle because Ukraine is not one country, contrary to what the American media, which speaks about the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Historically, ethnically, religiously, culturally, politically, economically, it's two countries. One half wants to stay close to Russia, the other wants to go west. We now have reliable reports that the anti-government forces in the streets, and there's some very nasty people among them, are seizing weapons in western Ukrainian military bases. So we have clearly the possibility of a civil war. And the longer-term outcome may be, and I want to emphasize this because nobody in the United States seems to want to pay attention to it, the outcome may be the construction, the emergence of a new Cold War divide between West and East, not this time, as it was for our generation, in faraway Berlin, but right on the borders of Russia, right through the heart of Slavic civilization. And if that happens, if that's the new Cold War divide, it's permanent instability and permanent potential for real war for decades to come. That's what's at stake. One last point. Also something that nobody in this country wants to talk about. The Western authorities, who bear some responsibility for what's happened, and who therefore also have blood on their hands, are taking no responsibility. They're uttering utterly banal statements which, because of their vacuous nature, are encouraging and rationalizing the people in Ukraine who are throwing Molotov cocktails, now have weapons, are shooting at police. We wouldn't permit that in any Western capital, no matter how righteous the cause. But it's being condoned by the European Union and Washington as events unfold.
And when you say the Western countries who bear some responsibility, in what sense do they bear responsibility? I mean, clearly there's been an effort by the United States and Europe ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union to pull the former Soviet states into their economic sphere. But is that the way you're talking about it?
I mean that. I mean that Moscow, look at it through Moscow's eyes. Since the Clinton administration in the 1990s, the U.S.-led West has been on a steady march toward post-Soviet Russia. Began with the expansion of NATO in the 1990s under Clinton. Bush then further expanded NATO all the way to Russia's borders. Then came the funding of what are euphemistically called NGOs, but they are political action groups funded by the West operating inside Russia. Then came the decision to build missile defense installations along Russia's borders, allegedly against Iran, a country which has neither nuclear weapons nor any missiles to deliver them with. Then comes American military outpost in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, which led to the war of 2008, and now the West is at the gates of Ukraine. So that's the picture, as Moscow sees it. And it's rational, it's reasonable, it's hard to deny. But as for the immediate crisis, let's ask ourselves this. Who precipitated this crisis? The American media says it was Putin and the very bad, though democratically elected, president of Ukraine, Yanukovych. But it was the European Union, backed by Washington, that said in November to the democratically elected president of a profoundly divided country, Ukraine, you must choose between Europe and Russia. That was an ultimatum to Yanukovych. Remember, wasn't reported here, at that moment, what did the much despised Putin say? He said, why? Why does Ukraine have to choose? We are prepared to help Ukraine avoid economic collapse, along with you, the West. Let's make it a tripartite package to Ukraine. And it was rejected in Washington and in Brussels. That precipitated the protests in the streets. And since then, the dynamic that any of us who have ever witnessed these kinds of struggles in the streets unfolded as extremists have taken control of the movement from the so-called moderate Ukrainian leaders. I mean, the moderate Ukrainian leaders with whom the Western foreign ministers are traveling to Kiev to talk, and they've lost control of the situation. By the way, people ask, excuse me, is it a revolution? Is it a revolution? A much abused word. But one sign of a revolution is the first victims of revolution are the moderates. And then it becomes a struggle between the extreme forces on either side. And that's what we're witnessing.
Let's go to the Ukrainian opposition leader, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who admitted earlier today the opposition does not have full control of protesters in Independence Square.
The only chance to do it is to stop the riot police, to stop the protesters, to impose a DMZ, like demilitarized zone, and to move this conflict from the streets to the parliament.
Parts of the protesters are out of control?
No one. I would be very frank that the government doesn't control the riot police, and it's very difficult for the opposition to control Maidan, and there are a number of forces who are uncontrolled.
So Ukraine
this is the truth.
Now.
Ukraine is in a big mess.
That's Ukrainian opposition leader Arseniy Yatsenyuk. Professor Cohen.
A moderate. Who wants to be president?
Let's go to President Obama. He's in Mexico for the big Mexico-Canada-U.S. summit, talking about Ukraine.
With regard to Ukraine, along with our European partners, we will continue to engage all sides. And we continue to stress to President Yanukovych and the Ukrainian government that they have the primary responsibility to prevent the kind of terrible violence that we've seen, to withdraw riot police, to work with the opposition to restore security and human dignity and move the country forward. And this includes progress towards a multi-party technical government that can work with the international community on a support package and adopt reforms necessary for free and fair elections next year. Ukrainians are a proud and resilient people who've overcome extraordinary challenges in their history, and that's a pride and strength that I hope they draw on now.
That's President Obama in Mexico, Professor Cohen.
What are you asking me to comment on?
Your response to his response.
What he just said, shame. Shame. He is saying that the responsibility for restoring peace is on the Ukrainian government, and it should withdraw its security forces from the streets. But let me ask you, if in Washington, people throwing Molotov cocktails are marching on Congress, and these people are headed for the Ukrainian Congress, if these people have barricaded entrance to the White House and are throwing rocks at the White House security guard, would President Obama withdraw his security forces? This is, and you know what this does? And let's escape partisanship here. I mean, lives are at stake. This incites these kinds of statements that Obama made. It rationalizes what the killers in the streets are doing. It gives them Western license, because he's not saying to the people in the streets, stop this, stop shooting policemen, stop attacking government buildings, sit down and talk. And the guy you had on just before a so-called moderate leader. What did he just tell you? We have lost control of the situation. That's what I just told you. He just confirmed that. So what Obama needs to say is we deplore what the people in the streets are doing when they attack the police, the law enforcement official. And we also don't like the people who are writing on buildings, Jews live here. Because these forces, these quasi-fascist forces. Let's address this issue, because the last time I was on your broadcast, you found some guy somewhere who said there was none of this there. All right, what percent are the quasi-fascists of the opposition? Let's say they're 5%. I think they're more, but let's give them the break, 5%. But we know from history that when the moderates lose control of the situation, they don't know what to do. The country descends in chaos. 5% of a population that's tough, resolute, ruthless, armed, well-funded, and knows what it wants can make history. We've seen it through Europe. We've seen it through Asia. This is a reality. And where Washington and Brussels are on this issue, they won't step up and take their responsibility.
Well, even in our most recent history, whether you look at Libya or whether you look at the situation in Syria, where those presidents warned that there were extremist elements inside a broader popular movement that were eventually going to gain control. This seems like a replay in terms of what's going on here in the Ukraine, of a popular movement, but yet a very, very, as you say, right-wing movement. Not only a right-wing movement, but a fascist movement with a history. Ukraine has had a history of a fascist movement going back to the days of Nazi Germany.
Let's go to real heresy. Let's ask a question. Who's been right about interpreting recent events? Let's go to the Arab Spring. Obama in Washington said this is about democracy now. This is great. Russia said, wait a minute. If you destabilize, even if they're authoritarian leaders in the Middle East, you're not going to get Thomas Jefferson in power. You're going to get jihadists. You're going to get very radical people in power all through the Middle East. Looking back, who is right or wrong about that narrative? Have a look at Egypt. Have a look at Libya. Who was right? Can Russians ever be right about anything? Now what are the Russians saying about Ukraine? They're saying what you just said, that the peaceful protesters, as we keep calling them, I think a lot of them have gone home. There were many. By the way, at the beginning, there were hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of very decent, liberal, progressive, honorable people in the streets. But they've lost control of the situation. That's the point now. And so the Russians are saying, look, you're trying to depose Yanukovych, who's the elected government. Think, if you overthrow, and by the way, there's a presidential election in a year. The Russians are saying, wait till the next election. If you overthrow him, and that's what Washington and Brussels are saying, that he must go, what are you doing to the possibility of democracy not only in Ukraine, but throughout this part of the world? And secondly, who do you think is going to come to power? Please tell us. And we're silent.
I want to go to the famous leak tape right now. The top State Department official has apologized to her European counterparts after she was caught cursing the European Union, the EU, in a leaked audio recording that was posted to YouTube. The recording captured an intercepted phone conversation between the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, and Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. diplomat for Europe. Nuland expresses frustration over Europe's response to the political crisis in Ukraine using frank terms.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, you know, the EU.
While Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland's comment about the EU dominated the news headlines because she used a curse, there were several other very interesting parts of her conversation with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine.
Let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deeds to stick. So Biden's willing.
That's the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Pyatt, speaking with Victoria Nuland. The significance of what she is saying. She also had gone to Ukraine and was feeding protesters on the front line.
Cookies. Cookies. Well, here again, the American political media establishment, including the right and the left and the center, because they're all complicit in this nonsense, focused on the two sensational, they thought, aspects of that leaked conversation. She said, F the European Union. And everybody said, oh my God, she said the word. The other thing was, who leaked it? Oh, it was the Russians. Those dirty Russians leaked this conversation. But the significance is what you just played. What are they doing? The highest-ranking State Department official, who presumably represents the Obama administration, and the American ambassador in Kiev are, to put it in blunt terms, plotting a coup d'etat against the elected president of Ukraine. Now, that said, Amy, Juan, you may say to me, neither of you would, but hypothetically, that's a good thing. We don't like this. We don't care if he was elected democratically. He's a rat. He's corrupt. And he is all those things. He is. Let's depose him. That's what the United States should do. Then the United States should stand up and say, that's what we do. We get rid of bad guys. We assassinate them and we overthrow them. But in Washington and Brussels, they lie. They're talking about democracy now. They're not talking about democracy now. They're talking about a coup now.
Well, this is more from...
And we American citizens should be allowed to choose which policy we want, but they conceal it from us. And I'm extremely angry that the people in this country who say they deplore this sort of thing have fallen silent.
Let's listen to a little bit more of the leaked conversation between the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, and Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. diplomat for Europe.
Good. So I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking, in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
That was Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. diplomat for Europe, speaking with Jeffrey Piat, the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine. Stephen Cohen, this chess game that they're conducting here.
Explain the names. Who is Cleach? Yats.
All right. And notice the intimacy which with the Americans deal with the two leading so-called moderate, and these are big shots. They both want to be president, Ukrainian opposition. Klitschko is Vitaly Klitschko, a 6'8" former. He resigned his title 2 months ago to enter politics, heavyweight champion of the world. His residence has been Germany. He pays taxes in Germany. He's a project of Merkel. He represents German interest. I'm sure he's also faithful to Ukraine, but he's got a problem. Yatsenyuk, or not Yatsenyuk, but the guy she calls Yats, is the representative of the Fatherland Party. It's a big party in Parliament, but Washington likes him a lot. They think he'll be our man. So you could see what they're saying. We don't quite trust Klitschko. Now, if you want to get esoteric, that's the tug between Washington and Berlin. They're not happy with Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. They don't like the role Merkel's playing generally. They think Germany's gotten too big for its britches. They want to cut Merkel down. So you notice Klitschko, the boxer, is Merkel's proxy, or at least she's backing him. You notice what they say. He's not ready for prime time. Let him do his homework. Now, this guy, I'm bad on Ukrainian names, Yatsenyuk, that they say has got to play a role. He's the leader of the Freedom Party, the Svoboda Party, but a large element of that party, to put it candidly, is quasi-fascist. And they're prepared to embrace this guy. This is the guy, by the way, that Senator John McCain in November or December went to Kiev and embraced. Either McCain didn't know who he was or he didn't care. The United States is prepared to embrace that guy, too. Anything to get rid of Yanukovych, because they think this is about Putin. That's all they really got on their mind.
And yet here you have President Obama, again, speaking yesterday in Mexico.
The States is not to see these as some Cold War chessboard in which we're in competition with Russia. Our goal is to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to make decisions for themselves about their future, that the people of Syria are able to make decisions without having bombs going off and killing women and children, or chemical weapons, or towns being starved because a despot wants to cling to power.
Who benefits from the instability, Professor Cohen, in Ukraine, and what does it mean for Putin? Is he concerned about this?
Of course he's concerned. It's right on his borders, and it's all tainting him. I mean, the Washington Post wrote an editorial yesterday. Putin is happy that the violence has broken out in the streets. Everybody understands, even the Washington Post understands, which understands almost nothing about Russia, but they got this, that during the Sochi Olympics, the last thing Putin wants is violence in Ukraine. So why is he happy about it? He deplores it. He's unhappy. He's furious at the president of Ukraine. He read him the riot act on the phone last night. That why doesn't he get control of the situation? What is he doing? So Putin's not responsible for this. Can we speak about Obama?
Very quickly.
Very quickly. I grew up in the segregated South. I voted for him twice as historical justice. That's not leadership. That's a falsification of what's happening in Ukraine. And it's making the situation worse. What he says is that we deplore the violence and call upon the Ukrainian government to withdraw its forces and stop the violence. He needs to talk about what's happening in the streets.
And is it conceivable if Ukraine descends into a further civil war that Russia might intervene?
It's conceivable. It's conceivable. Here, I mean, Yanukovych, you might say, as an advisor to Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine, impose martial law now because you've got bad PR in the West anyway, and you're not in control of the situation. The problem is Yanukovych isn't sure he controls the army.
He just fired the head of the army.
Yeah, we don't know what it means, but it indicates he's not too sure about the army. But by the way, you ask, would Russia intervene? Would NATO intervene? NATO's all over the place. NATO was in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. Ask yourself that. Would NATO send troops in? Is that yes? You think they would? We don't know.
We don't know, yeah.
And we're not going to be told, just like we're not being told what's going on in these private conversations about deposing the president of Ukraine.
Unless
if they
they're
depose,
leaked again.
Yeah, and if the Russians leak them, it doesn't count.
The U.S. can hardly protest, given the whole scandal with the NSA recording
They said, when this got leaked, that this is a low point in statecraft. After Snowden, I mean, what did Tennessee Williams used to say? Mendacity? Mendacity? The mendacity of it all? Don't they trust us, our government, to tell us a little bit of the truth at last?
I'm going to end my part now by attaching the video from February by the Jewish American professor on Democracy Now! With showing a knowledge of what's going on and actually saying what Obama is causing that we see today. That it's nothing accidental. It's the stupidity or arrogance or ignorance or whatever underneath is the Islamofascist manipulation and all of this going on. Nobody standing up and dealing with the problems of protecting and making it safe for people to walk on the street and have their home there. Watch them beating the Russians for speaking Russian.